Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Grcevich from Key Ministry, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this segment of our video training on mental health inclusion ministry. And today we're going to talk specifically about strategies for being able to welcome and include folks who struggle with self-control as a result of a mental health condition. It's important, in understanding this issue, to appreciate the fact that, our churches, the church as a whole, as well as our individual congregations, all have their own unique culture. And in the context of that culture, we oftentimes have very clear expectations for how we expect, children and adults to act, to interact, and what we expect them to behave like when we're in worship services, Christian education, and other church-related activities. One of the things that's common among folks with a wide range of both common and serious mental health conditions is that oftentimes these mental health conditions compromise our ability to be able to maintain our executive functioning, which is a topic that we referred to in the book. And by executive functioning, what we mean is that these are a series of processes that basically oversee everything else that goes on in the brain. It's our executive functioning that allows us, to stop and think before we make bad decisions, to be able to learn from our mistakes, to take things that we've learned in one situation and to be able to apply it in a new situation. The ability to be able to self-regulate our emotions and hide our emotions when it's appropriate to do so. It also governs our ability to be able to set priorities, to delay gratification, to manage time. And those are all things that are very important for people who are seeking to lead a spiritually disciplined life. For folks who have common mental health conditions, and ADHD in particular is a prototype of this, it's not that they can or can't control their behavior. They may need to develop more mental energy and devote more resources to being able to do that. And there are things that we do in the church that may take away or diminish their capacity for being able to do that when they're together with us. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. So that, again, if you think about ADHD as being the prototype, this is an especially pressing issue for people who are involved in children's ministry and student ministry. And a good way of thinking about executive functioning is that it's analogous to the processor or the RAM that you have on your computer. Things may get stored on the hard drive, but when you have 15 different programs at once and you're streaming video from 3 different locations on the web, if you're a Mac user like I am, you get that little pinwheel that comes up that shows that the system's starting to crash and burn, or you get the hourglass if you happen to be a Windows user. And so that one of the things that happens is that the more information and the more stimulation that someone has to process if they're struggling with executive functioning, the fewer resources they're able to have, to benefit from learning what's being communicated in the environment that they're in, and the fewer resources they have available to them cognitively to be able to make good decisions and maintain self-control. So that some of the things to think about, and one of the ways that this plays in terms of church environments, is that there are a lot of folks in the children's ministry field who seem to think that with more and more kids having diminished attention, the more stimulation, the better. The problem with this is that, all of the brain power that it takes to take in and process, everything that's going on around you in that environment makes it a lot less likely that you're going to remember the lesson that was taught in Sunday school that day. So the example on the right is actually from my home church, where our student minister at the time had a good understanding of how, form follows function. And when they were redesigning the worship space for our middle school age kids, he set it up intentionally to be able to remove some of the distractions that would take away from kids being able to process the teaching that they were experiencing, and to remove some of the stimulation that would diminish their ability to be able to maintain self-control. Andy Stanley at North Point Community Church, has talked about the concept of one-point messages. And when we think about communication with folks who struggle with executive functioning, they have a hard time being able to remember lists. If you give them like a typical sermon with 3 or 4 or 5 points, they won't remember any of it. So that one of the things that Andy focuses on in his messages is to focus on one particular theme or one particular teaching point in an entire message, and giving folks one specific to-do in a sense, or one idea for how they should react, respond to, and act upon that message in the week ahead. And so that type of communication oftentimes works well with folks who are struggling with executive functioning. One of the other things that's an important issue to think about when you're considering your ministry environments is the importance of signage. Folks who struggle with executive functioning have a very difficult time with sequential information. So that the more clear and the more simple the directions are, the easier time folks will have being able to assimilate and to locate your ministry environments. One of the other things that's important to keep in mind sometimes with folks with executive functioning struggles or folks who struggle with self-control, is that they're very susceptible to the influence of some of the people who are around them. One of the things that's really important oftentimes is community. Another thing that's important to understand about folks who struggle with this is that oftentimes they're better doers as opposed to listeners. So that we were consulted one time by a church that was struggling because 9 of the 16 boys in their middle school group had been diagnosed with ADHD, and they were having a hard time sitting around discussing the lessons that the girls in the group were processing on a week-to-week basis. My recommendation to their ministry leaders was that they take the boys and they get them involved with loading a truck down at the local food bank while their leaders processed the message with them while they were in the act of doing. Because again, like folks, one of the blessings that some people have who struggle with executive function is that they may actually have fewer inhibitions about sharing their faith or actually taking action to do something to advance the work of the gospel. Now, we're also talking about, or was starting to talk a moment ago, about the importance of accountability. And so that one of the things you want to be very intentional about when you have kids who struggle with self-control or executive functioning, adults who struggle, is again, they're oftentimes going to be influenced by their peers. And so that, getting them involved in the relational fabric of the church in such a way that there are people who will remind them when they don't see them at church. He'll send them a text, he'll message them if they're struggling to be able to follow through on a specific spiritual discipline or to stay involved with a group or to stay involved with a task is something that's really important. And also, people who struggle with self-control tend to take on some of the characteristics of folks that are around them. So making sure that they're surrounded by solid, mature Christians who make good choices in their day-to-day activity is something that becomes critically important. So that's a little bit about specific ways to be able to minister to folks who struggle with executive functioning. I'd encourage you to read through Mental Health in the Church. We have a number of additional ideas there and additional resources on our Key Ministry website and on our blogs. Thank you.